Welcome to ABMA's Inside the Boiler Room. I'm Scott Lynch, ABMA President and CEO, and the host of today's episode. As this is a podcast that's both audio and video now, on today's episode, we are going to dive into the topic that is critical to operating and maintaining safe and efficient boiler rooms. And I'm not talking about some boiler technology here. I'm actually talking about boiler education, especially for the boiler end user. I'm excited to have Jonathan Kapel of Steamworks join us. He's a new ABMA member, and he's going to tell the Steamworks story, but it's going to be anchored around our discussion around ensuring that end users operate a safe and efficient boiler room. So without further delay, I'm going to bring in Jonathan. Here he comes.
Hello.
Jonathan, with his amazing microphone.
Hey,
the
man,
resonance is going to be great on this podcast.
I'm just trying to keep up with the ABMA. That's it.
There you go.
I'm just happy to be here.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. We've had a number of conversations around this over the last, 6 months, from when you guys reached out to we met together when I was in Cleveland. And you have an amazing passion around this. And we also see it as such a critical component of boiler operations, is boiler education and being properly trained. But before we jump into that, just give me a little bit, because you actually come to the boiler industry with a somewhat circuitous route. And so why don't you share how you got to us?
Yeah. So I did not come out of the womb thinking boilers was going to be my gig. I was thinking maybe something closer to basketball with Space Jam. I don't know. That was kind of a thing at the time. But in high school, they tell you to follow your passion. And I did that, and I got my passion career. And as soon as I got in there, kind of felt like maybe I'm not so passionate about this.
Right.
Kind of felt my way through it. And after a couple of years of searching, a buddy of mine who has his boiler license, I'm operating out of the Northeastern Ohio area. And he kind of turned me on to it, longtime friends, but just started to listen to in my time of need. I got there and went into the boiler room, assuming that it was temporary, and found out I was kind of hoodwinked into this career. Yeah. So I think after a couple of years of operating, what happened for me was I found out that I could build a passion, and the kind that I was really hoping for. It's not quite dunking on people with Space Jam, but it's been a really great career. And along the route, and part of our conversations have gone, Scott, where I've had to learn many things. I mean, on day one, somebody told me to move that valve, and my response was, "What is a valve? Let's start a little bit more fundamental."
Yeah.
So I've had to get my licks along the way for sure, and I can tell you that it's been enjoyable and hard, and all in one, definitely.
Yeah. So now let's transition then. So how do you get to Steamworks?
Yeah.
And then talk about Steamworks in terms of like what you guys do and how you have impacted or continue to impact the boiler sector.
Yeah. So in Ohio, you have to have a license. There's to operate high steam pressure boilers. And across the nation, there's not too many of those programs left, but I was fortunate enough to find, actually, friends and family helped me fund my way through boiler school. And I attended Steamworks as a student. So I met this guy named Dean Wilson, and he wrote Boiler Operators Workbook, and he's tremendous, an operator grown into teacher, and built this business that was basically training and some consulting as well on boilers. Eventually ended up finding my way back to Dean after a few years of operating. And he was able to coach me into the position that I am today. And now I've been owner, CEO of Steamworks for several years now.
And I will say, though, briefly, that the transition from operator or technician to trainer, it's a process. And and not everybody can do it. And I
Yeah.
also think that we even have conversations internally about that
Yeah.
somebody that has a technical background isn't always a great trainer, and
Yeah.
you have to kind of find the person, and you have a passion for it, which is great. But
Yeah.
I think this also kind of gets to some of the stuff we're going to be talking about, that you need somebody who's a trainer or somebody who understands how to train in
Yeah.
order to really teach properly or to give them what they need.
Yeah, absolutely. I got the benefit, I think, in that way, in that my passion career prior to that gave me some experiences where
Yeah, right.
I got to learn how to teach and
Hmm.
learn how to navigate some of those public speaking events and
Yeah, right.
organization and stuff. It's definitely another skill
Yeah.
and super necessary because we can't just assume that when we throw an operator with Jim, who's been there for 40 years. Jim is going to do an excellent job at the things he knows how to explain, but he hasn't really had to explain them, in a way that is palatable for everybody to hear.
Well,
Um,
and I guess the other part of this is that Jim's been doing it the same way for 40 years, and that might actually not be accurate or might not
so-
be the best way to do it,
I'm
right?
going to let you say that one, but yes, I would agree with that.
So just briefly, Steamworks itself,
Yeah.
what are you guys today focused on?
Yeah, we primarily do three things. We do training nationwide. Probably the most common thing that we do is customized training. So we'll come on site and build a training for your team and your equipment. We have consulting where we'll do written SOPs and audits, Steam audits, and help people to upskill their process, not just people. And then we a third branch. So we got training, consulting, and operations is the last thing, which is actually having a crew on site and operating boilers. And we primarily do that in Ohio and surrounding Ohio areas because we know a lot of people who have licenses in that way. So we
And you
probably a
mentioned
network.
that
Go
if
ahead.
somebody who has a license
Mhm.
at a facility leaves, there can be a gap there, and they
Yeah.
can't just bring anybody in. So your services are helpful because you can bring in somebody that can get them through
Yeah.
a peak time or get them through somebody departing, right?
Yeah, I mean, as a training origin company, our biggest goal is to position people for um, long-term success. So even
Mhm.
if it's just a temporary gig, we're hopefully trying to recruit people in that way so we can fill that gap for the long run.
Mhm. All
Yeah.
right, so I'm going to give you a sentence that I'd like you to finish.
Oh boy.
And the sentence I'd like you to finish is: the only way to ensure that a boiler room is optimized and running efficiently every day, an end user must.
Mm. Um, Pay attention to the details.
Okay.
What I tell people, what my mind is going on that, Scott, is that a lot of people um, think of the boiler operator as someone who manages something that is already automated.
Right.
And where we've come from is a long lasting trade. And we have automated things, but we sometimes have forgotten that there's a large amount of work in interpreting great data because your job is really to um, as an operator to do things safely and efficiently, your job comes down to interpreting the invisible. And when
Hmm.
we do that, the only way that we can interpret the invisible, like we don't see the steam, right? We don't see the flow through the pipes. We have only the data to kind of stare us back in the face as operators and to make the right call. So yeah, I think I'm okay with my finishing of your sentence. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all in the details.
And so the idea then is it's when you see spikes or changes in data
Yeah.
that something else is going on in the system, and we probably want to figure out what's going on, is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
and as operators too, as first responders, is making sure that you have all those tools and resources that you need.
Hmm.
Just like recently did a project where we had this issue where we're trying to troubleshoot why is the boiler going down on low water. It wasn't an unsafe condition. The switch was working, but it was kind of tough to extrapolate the reason why. It
Sure.
happened while we were there, and we
Hmm.
went down, rushed down to the boiler house. And one of the things we wanted to check was pump pressure. And as we trended the pump pressure, I mean, we were only there 5 minutes after it happened. We realized that had only been trending that pump pressure for about 90 seconds. And in that moment, it was like, dang, we are dead in the water. If we don't have good data and we're
Yeah.
not calling for
Right.
those resources, we can't really figure out what the issue is, right?
So when you guys go in
Mhm.
to a boiler room and are going to do the on-site training, um, I'm sure you get a wide range of people, the operators, the people who are running the boiler room in terms of their experience and in terms of their education and everything. What are
Mhm.
the keys that you guys look at when you start this process? What are you trying to, I mean, you want to set them up for success.
Yeah.
How do you know what they don't know? And then how do you know what's really going on in that boiler room?
Yeah. It is a process to get to the bottom of that. And I would say on the front end, we do a good bit of engaging with a client to figure out who is it that we're teaching? Is it the veteran operators? Is it new people? Is it people who have had any boiler experience? And we do a fair bit of surveying as far as at least getting some pictures and data and manufacturer's guide on their specific equipment.
Mhm.
The reality is that all that upfront work is very helpful to set a direction, but the tone is decided once we get there.
Yeah.
When we actually get a chance to speak with people and be in that training, we, you know, I'm pretty good at talking a lot, but I prefer a dialogue certainly,
Mhm.
and I think that ultimately is kind of the cherry on top, if you will, is
Yeah.
that we got to be in a situation where um, people are cognizant of where they are, and sometimes the answer to that is we don't know the questions even to ask.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
say today, not to just keep on the point here, but I would say today that almost I would say probably 75% of the trainings that I do are fundamentals right now. There is such a wild gap in all skilled trades, and we have no oasis here, certainly.
Yeah.
And so, the understanding of steam and physics is pretty dropped. I mean, we understand welding is a thing and HVAC is a thing, but steam boilers, it feels like a footnote in my history books, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, and actually, I was gonna. That was my next question on this. Was kind of like our goal here on the actually on the podcast. Really, we're not trying. And if for ABMA, we don't want to create boiler technicians, right, with the
Yeah.
end users. That's not the goal here.
Mhm.
But there's got to be something in between the boiler technician who's coming in who really can diagnose something and
Yeah.
somebody who's operating the equipment who at least understands how the equipment runs, understands when something is off that they know to contact the somebody who has more experience or to
Yes.
head off some stuff. And so why don't you talk to that a little bit in terms
Mhm.
of like, okay, you want to get them from here to here,
Yeah.
but that's still a large gap from what you're saying.
Yeah, there's probably a couple groups of people, but I would say that, in the tone of that we're missing people in the skilled trades in general, the boiler technicians and those companies also are suffering
Hmm.
for more hands. And so,
Right.
in that way, one of the things that we probably would really like to upscale in house for an end user is to try to do our very best to find those manual reset switches, to find some of the
Hmm.
simpler troubleshooting techniques in such a way that it eliminates or reduces, not eliminates, but it reduces the amount of unnecessary call-ins, the ones
Sure.
that are just annoying and
Right.
nobody's really happy at the end because somebody feels like they wasted their time that they don't really want to bill for. And it kind of creates a sour relationship because, oh, all I had to do was press this button, you know.
Yeah.
And there's some more technical things as well, because what we want to be able to see is not only that it would run, but that operators there are paying attention long enough to understand the DNA of the swing of their plant, from morning to night or season to season, however
Hmm.
that looks, product to product, possibly is how that works for them. But that's more of a job of the operators, and so they should
Right.
be creating those logs and nuances, like we talked about before, where they're upskilled in such a way that they are looking at data very technically. So in the vein that you're talking about, you have these groups of people that now I know what is normal. And
Hmm.
when I know that is out of control or out of normal, that's because I've been paying attention. And I have the ability and competency, maybe not to fix every problem, but to have a good understanding of when do I need to give somebody a call, or this has happened 10 times. Is there something that we've been consistently doing wrong?
Hmm. Yeah.
A lot of that comes down to, Scott, not just simply boiler operation, but things like water chemistry as well. I think one of the
Please
uh,
share water chemistry. We always love talking about this.
I just think what operators probably could use a whole lot of, and increasing reliability these days, is not just the mechanics of running the tests and making
Right.
sure it's on the sheet
Within the
for the end
range.
of the day,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But that we understand what it says and what it means, and how I can kind of get ahead of something that prevents a larger issue or
Well,
prevents more upset.
yeah, because we hear it all the time
Mhm.
that bad water in a boiler can destroy a boiler pretty badly, and it
Yes.
can
Yeah.
destroy
Yeah.
it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Tubes,
Yeah.
the inside,
Yeah.
and I've seen it. I've gone on a job in Richmond where they were pulling out tubes that looked like they were like eaten alive, right?
Yeah.
And it's just
Hmm.
like there is a quick way to ruin your boiler,
Yeah.
and bad water is a very quick way to do that.
The steam industry, there's just more to it than white smoke out of a teapot,
Right.
and I think
Yep.
one of our struggles at Steamworks as an educator is that we often fight the notion that we could get this done in a 4-8 hour class, right?
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
what we find is that um, people are desiring more because it's a little bit more complicated than they anticipated.
Hmm.
And I think as end users, what will help them feel like they got the biggest bang for their buck is sometimes when they have a team that is upskilled in such a way that they can explain what is conventionally correct for how we, for
Right.
example, water
Sure.
treatment or frequencies of blowdowns, or we made this decision because it was based upon long held and understood procedures, not
Right.
just because we needed to get it back on.
Yeah, right, exactly. So let's talk. We talked about this before. The whole idea of penny wise and pound foolish, right?
Hmm.
That when it comes to the boiler room, a brand new boiler room, that's a huge investment for a company, right? There's a lot of money that's going into that investment.
Yeah.
It is something that is, but it only runs well efficiently, meaning that
Mhm.
like it runs with the proper amount of gas or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
And it only runs safely if it's done properly, right? And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
so my theory is that if you spend the money on the front end to make sure that everybody who's in that room is educated and knows what they're doing
Yeah.
and can head off some of these issues, it's
Yes.
going to be cheaper in the end than paying to retube the boiler every 5 years or
Yeah.
paying to do something massive to the boiler room because it was neglected, They were just doing some operations wrong. Am
Yeah.
I way off on that, or do you think I'm pretty close?
No, I think probably the age-old story for us goes like this and for everyone. Frank has been there forever and he knows everything and he has announced that he's retiring in 2 years and we're like, "Let's get what Frank has," and we talk about getting what Frank has for 2 years and then he
Right.
leaves. And I think right there in that intercept, whether it's new equipment or it's the experience gone walking out the door, that's a critical moment for people to consider saying, yes, it's an extra hesitation. Yes, it's an extra investment. And yet, I think in the long run, if what you want is safety, if what you want is efficiency, if you want to increase your reliability, um, you have to really look and say, what is the equipment? What's the proper logs? What's the proper PMs? And how do we interpret these things? And that's not simply handing somebody a sheet. You're going to have to dig a little bit deeper. I will say that there's been um, more than what are we at? September now. In 9 months, there's been at least 7 facilities this year where that story has happened, and we were called on site after the fact of the deaerator, screaming signs that it wasn't
Right.
working, but it
Yeah.
had to be interpreted, or
Yeah.
the softener's not working, it had to be interpreted. Foaming conditions causing tremendous water hammer, and because Frank had gone, or because time hasn't been invested, the um, the operators themselves had no resources to raise a red flag and say, "Hey, maybe we should consider pivoting here, and it will pay back,
Right.
tenfold."
Well, and I guess what I would say to that is that, especially in an investment situation,
Mm.
get off on the right foot, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like you spent all this money, and the truth is, as we wrap up here, the rep that's installing the product, they can get them going,
yeah,
but in many cases, they can't be spending, 2 weeks at the
yeah,
facility. Their goal is to get that boiler up and running and to give them the basics that they need.
yeah,
That
yeah,
the education or the abilities of the people working the room, there has to be more investment, and there are other ways too. I mean,
yeah,
we have a number of members that do training where you go to them and you do a
mhm,
3 day, and that might actually be a good step as well. I mean,
certainly.
there's also all of our many of our manufacturers do webinars, so if
Yeah,
they do a free webinar on something related to their product, let them take their breaks and do it. Like, encourage
yeah,
them to be a part of that. There's so many opportunities out there,
yes,
and we could even in the podcast notes, we could even list a couple here and reach
yeah,
out. Like you guys are one solution, but there are
yeah,
many solutions out there,
yes,
and
yep,
and it's really the role to seek that out. One other
yep,
solution is to attend our trade show, that
yep,
happens every 2 years.
mhm,
We did it this year, and we're going to be in Nashville in 2026.
yeah,
Somebody will be able to come. They'll be able to tour the boiler room at the Gaylord, in
mhm,
Nashville. They'll be able to tour the manufacturing, the rental units outside.
yeah,
They'll be able to engage with manufacturers, and we'll have education there. So
yeah,
I think it's really just investing in your people. But then in the end, that safe and efficient boiler room running at optimized, opportunities that they have, that's the goal. And
yeah.
we can, and I think as an industry, we can also do a better job of doing this, but we can help companies get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could use there's so many options, and we could even use more. So, some of you veteran operators who are considering that next phase, you should consider joining in, to speak about your experience and build that skill of
Hmm.
becoming like an honest trainer. Because
Hmm.
we could, there's a difference between the people who are making sure that it hums along and fixes out those details,
Right.
and we need those, also the backbone of people who have operated it for years, who understand what the problems feel like at 3 o'clock in the morning, and how to think through the best next steps in moments of chaos and how to bring it back into control.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. There's a whole lot more that we could talk about here, but I think that the objective behind my desire to engage you was to kind of begin that dialogue. ABMA is having an internal dialogue about this, about how we can play this role as a conduit, to help to get the end user and training opportunities available to them together, right? And how people can find organizations like yourself and like many of our members that also do training and make sure they're aware that this training's available. And there is an investment that has to take place on some of this stuff, but if you put that investment in the front end, it's going to pay you back. And I think that's evident. Well, Jonathan, before you go, do me a favor, tell people where they can find you guys.
Certainly, yeah. Just check us out on steamworksllc.com. You'll find all the information there for our social and services. And you can reach out to me personally at John@steamworksllc.com too.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. And just stay tuned for more episodes of Inside the Boiler Room. Follow us on YouTube, like us on your audio podcast platforms so you don't miss any future episodes. Visit abma.com for more insight. Sign up for our weekly newsletter on the website. And we look forward to seeing you next month. So talk to you guys soon.